Welcome to the COCIR MedTech Europe webinar, where we will be talking about the recent white paper on e-health from the medical technology industry called Interoperability Standards in Digital Health. My name is Michael Strubin, and I work for MedTech Europe as Digital Health Director.
Yes, and my name is Danny van Rooyen. I'm the Digital Health Director at COCIR, and we're happy to welcome you. Before we get into the real substance of today's webinar, I would like to run you through the practicalities for today. So in principle, all people will be auto-muted upon entry, but they can be unmuted later in the session. Please make sure to mute you once you stop speaking. To comment or ask questions during the presentations, you can use the chat window. Before and during the Q&A, please ask your question using the chat or raise your hand feature. This session will also be recorded, and afterwards the recording and slide decks will be made available to you.
Excellent. Thank you. And with that, we're going straight into the agenda. So we're going to start with our featured speaker. Then we will have a panel of stakeholders or experts. We're going to go through one by one. At the end of the meeting, we open this up for Q&A before we then close and thank you and hope to have you all done at the top of the hour. So no surprises here, and all of our speakers who have confirmed are actually here with us. With that, let's go just quickly. We're not going to bore you much about the host organizations, but we just wanted to give you a quick update or share some information about the medical technology industry in Europe. We have a big market in Europe with more than 100 billion euros every year in turnover. Our sector employs 675,000 people in Europe. There are lots of diagnostic tests, even more medical devices, and our sector is a small and medium-sized sector. No, I should say our sector is dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises. 95% of the 27,000 companies in Europe are SMEs. And ours is a very innovative sector. We're doing lots of research innovation. We file lots of patents. With that, Paul, I think we are going to start with our first speaker. We have Paul Koberg Vandenberg. He's Standardization Manager at Philips. He's also the chair of the MedTech Europe Interoperability Working Group, and he's a member of the COCIR Interoperability Group as well. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you all attendees for joining us during this launch event. Can we flip the slide? Thank you. Yeah, we all know all the challenges faced by our healthcare systems today and the urge to improve on them. And I believe personally, I like the summary provided by what is known as the Quadruple Aim for healthcare very much for what we should aim to achieve. And that's depicted here on the left, better clinical outcomes, better patient experience, also very important, better caregiver experience. And last but not least, lower cost. That's a very important society goal. Next slide, please. So fortunately, there's a lot of opportunities for innovation. And I think innovation will only help when it's meaningful innovation, but it absolutely holds a strong promise for us. It could help to get better clinical decisions, diagnosis, therapy plan, better clinical execution in terms of compliance to the plans and to the rules, accuracy, logging, measuring outcomes, and also better operational execution, because a care giving organization is of course also something with operational processes just without the clinical associations, also asset utilization, all those things. So meaningful innovation has a great potential to help us surmount those healthcare challenges. But there are many different aspects of meaningful innovation, and technology is only one of them, and digitization is only one of the technologies that can help us. And in the end, interoperability as a key enabler, therefore, is only one of very many aspects that need to be resolved. But it's an important one, because without interoperability, digitization of healthcare won't bring any benefits. It will just replace the old problems by new problems. And we're not especially keen to get that, right? We truly want to make strides forward. Next slide. I believe that of all those in this launch event now, we're all agreed, or most of us are already agreed for long, that we need better interoperability in healthcare. And MedTech Europe and COCIR are not the only ones that have articulated recommendations to that effect in position papers. A lot of companies have done so, and all across the globe, people are writing and talking about it already for years. The problem is that there are so many complexities, as depicted in the middle bubble here on the slide. Interoperability requires cooperation between a number of parties, not in the least standards development organizations, vendors, buyers, end users. And there is so much complexity that it is actually hard to truly get interoperability in practice. Care providers need solutions to support caregiving, and vendors offer what is for the customer actually quite often a point solution, a device, a system, but not an end-to-end solution. And to get the end-to-end solutions, you really need that interoperability. But the healthcare IT and medical device vendors face scattered demand because there's so much around and there's so much complexity. Next slide. Fortunately, there are a couple of things that we can do about it. And that's not going to be the silver bullet, but it will certainly help. As reiterated in various position papers, we believe that the public authorities can play a strong role by fostering the convergence of demand for interoperability implementations using standards. The care providers, they can better articulate their buyer and user demands. The standard setters can focus more on solving the real problem and not just a point problem. But for that, they need the input from the left-hand side, right? And the industry experts, they can better foster the better understanding and awareness. And that is what COCIR and MedTech Europe hope to contribute to foster better understanding and awareness with this paper. Authoring this paper took quite an effort. And we will surely be monitoring the feedback and reactions from the field, from all of you, and from those others who will be digesting the paper. And of course, we hope it will be received well. And if so, we will surely build on it by periodic updates. To be very frank with you, we had even broader ambitions for the paper, but we also wanted you to be able to get it fast and not 3 years from now. And because it's a lot of work, we have chosen to not do it all in one go. So if you would love to see certain additions, to see for certain things elaborated upon that you are missing, let us know, and we will be happy to work with you or with others or both to add those going forward. So we invite all involved parties also to engage in a dialogue with us. What do you like about the paper? What don't you like? What do you miss? And to help us take action along the lines I'm presenting here to help us all achieve better interoperability in healthcare, and through that to create better conditions for meaningful innovation to support the Quadruple Aim. Next slide. Just very briefly, what the document is about. It places the healthcare interoperability in context by explaining various models. There are various layered models, for instance, about the scope from, let's say, the point of care to entire systems of hospitals that work together, even cross-border, an important theme also in Europe, of course. There is a layered model about, let's say, more the functional layers, from the very technical things at the bottom, getting the bits from A to B, to the more organizational and formal agreements layer at the top, so that organizations can truly work together by having similar processes and having the right agreements in place, and everything in between. We cover the different types of standards, clarifying the different roles. And also we cover the main healthcare IT standards development organizations and the families of standards that they have been developing, and positioning those standards both in those layered models, but also for their focal domains. What are they targeting to resolve in terms of the needs, to clarify the purpose and the complementarity of all those standards. And finally, last but not least, we took a number of healthcare domains, and it's especially there where there is still quite some opportunity to add further sections to the document in the years to follow. And per domain, we look at how the different standards that can help to solve the end-to-end solution needs for that domain can be applied in conjunction to actually create solutions. So with that, I think I've said probably enough. We sincerely hope that this paper will help to increase the understanding of the very complex palette of healthcare interoperability standards. So to you all, please spread the news, share the document with those in your orbit who may find it of use, and let us know what you think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I think this has been short and crisp, and we're actually doing really well on time. We would now like to launch into a short round of reactions from our panel of stakeholders. But before I do that, let's remind everybody that you can raise your hand, or you can ask any questions in the chat, and we're collecting those, and we may be giving you an opportunity to raise those questions later. Now back to our stakeholders. So we asked them to come prepared to share either views about the document or views and observations about the next steps to advance interoperability in Europe and maybe internationally. So while we invite them to take their turn, we ask our audience to start your interaction, but remain muted. Feel free to join the chat. We want to begin with Carrie Thompson. Carrie Thompson is the Deputy Head of eHealth Wellbeing and Aging Unit at DG Connect and the European Commission. Carrie, don't forget to unmute you. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Michael, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased that you invited us to this launch. And indeed, I'd like to start with some remarks about the white paper that you've just briefly presented, and you've obviously spent a lot of time preparing. And I mean, from my perspective, it's a very welcomed contribution. I read it through, and in a very, very complex field, I find it very, very detailed and technical, but it was also presented in a very pedagogical way, which is I know is such a challenge in this area, and I really find that it illuminates the complexities and all the issues that we're facing in dealing with interoperability and the range of possible specifications and standards, but it's all done in an extremely readable way. And of course, knowing that it's the white paper from the two communities of MedTech and COCIR, and therefore it's got the support of these important health tech communities, makes it also extremely valuable, because what we all know with interoperability is that we have to be doing this together. We've all got to be playing our part. So all told, I see it personally as a very, very valuable contribution to the landscape, a really, really positive sign of your engagement, and a support for what we're doing at the European level, and support for what we really kind of boosted with the Commission recommendation we adopted in 2019 on the electronic health record exchange format. So that's a few words on the paper. I would like to compliment, if that's okay, saying a little bit about what we're doing on interoperability more broadly, put the paper in the context of what's going on in the kind of European framework right now. Obviously, Ron will complement with the member states' perspective. But, well, as you know, we see interoperability very much as a really foundation stone for what we're trying to do in terms of the digital transformation of health and care, in terms of developing the European health data space. We really see it as very much a fundamental prerequisite to all these actions that we want to put in place, that we intend to support under the digital programme, where we're trying to secure and, of course, link different kinds of health data, electronic health records, of course, but also, genomics, anonymised cancer images, and therefore it's a prerequisite for the wider actions as well that we're trying to do to really energise the innovation in ecosystems, such as through these infrastructures we're calling testing and experimentation facilities, which plan to use the health data, will need to have linked health data across borders, and then making them available for innovators for the testing of their project, for their products. So, we really boosted, I think, we helped put wind in the sails with the Commission recommendation for 2019, and now, a couple of years later, we can see there's really a nice process in place with the Commission and the Member States working together, and with stakeholders involved as well, as we intended in the recommendation. So you mentioned it in the report, but we have the XE Health project, where it's a consortium, it's funded under Horizon, it's a consortium run by member states, and there are many stakeholders involved, and so I hope you'll agree that there's transparency in this process. And of course, we hope the XE Health project will yield some technical specifications for these priority areas that we're working on right now, lab tests, discharge letters, images, in early autumn 2022. And when we have these, we'll share these final project deliverables, of course, with the wider member states for their consideration. So this is how, and then I expect that after that, it won't be the end of the story. There'll be other priorities that we'll need to look at. I think that there'll be more to do to elaborate the exchange format. So we'll put more actions in place and work in a similar style, in an open and transparent way, and then really taking these drafts to see whether we can get the consensus that we need out of them and to put them in place. And I want to just say, because I think we still can, because it's still ongoing, about the pandemic and its impact on interoperability. Well, we've seen it led to a big rise in people's understanding about the importance of interoperability. Not just, that it's not just about the technical specifications, of course, but it's about the semantics, the legislative, the organizational aspects. And the pandemic led to a lot of really, from our side, and I'm sure one will agree, very, very urgent, focused interoperability activity around COVID-19. And because we realized all the things that we could not do when we really needed to do them. So it has led to a lot of very intensive working between the Commission and the Member States, to create interoperable approaches around contact tracing and, of course, digital COVID certificates. We've also got wider work on interoperability in particular contexts, funded by, for example, the Horizon project. We've got this Inter-EHR project that's looking at interoperability with health systems data and across to personal devices and all these issues around putting the citizen at the centre. So we've got a lot of stuff ongoing. We've really got a lot of work to do, and we know that there are loads of challenges ahead. As I mentioned, there's more technical specifications to work on, but we also know that we need to really develop the uptake of technical specifications once they're developed and once they're agreed and once they're a consensus. So, looking ahead, of course, we've got resources to spend under Horizon, the digital programme, EU for Health, where we're going to keep working on this, energising the ecosystem, working with member states. And we're helped, I think, to see the progress that we're making by a survey that we've just commissioned. It's just been published on interoperable e-health, the development of interoperable electronic health record systems as a whole. And this is a survey we commissioned from Empirica and Open Evidence to entities. And for us, and I hope for others, it's going to be a very valuable snapshot. We're looking across to see where the different national systems are now. We get a nice baseline, how far advanced they are in terms of the technical specifications, what kind of infrastructure they're using, what sort of semantic interoperability is in place. And then we can look and see, how this changes if we can rerun the survey, in part, later we can see the impact of our policy actions and our different investments. So this is a very valuable, and you should be able to see it now on our website. So just finally, because I think I have very limited time, I just wanted to say that we're drafting, as well as you know, I think a legislative proposal on the European Health Data Space. The Commission will come forward with this in early 2022, and of course it's looking at, again, how we can strengthen interoperability as a whole across the European Union, improving uptake, and also as well as looking at infrastructural aspects, government aspects of health data sharing across countries. So thank you. That's really what I wanted to say, and I don't want to take up too much time.
Thanks a lot, Kerry, for this first intervention and for your first reaction to our paper. Also highlighting some of the elements that are on the roadmap, and as you mentioned, member states will play a role, coordination with the wider ecosystem as well. So therefore, we're also very pleased to welcome today with us Ron Roosendaal, who wears two hats as the Chief Information Officer at the Dutch Ministry of Health, but maybe also importantly as one of the eHealth Network co-chairs. I'm happy to pass the floor to you, Ron.
Yes, thank you very much. Happy to be here too. I would love to meet in person, and I hope we can do that next year, but I'm happy to be asked to speak today about the role of government, member states, and in particular the eHealth network. My compliments for the white paper. I also read it, but for now I will go into the role of the governments and member states in the EU and the eHealth network. And I want to start with recognition of the work of the eHealth network during the pandemic. And we have shown that if member states work together in unity, we are able to solve interoperability issues as fast as possible and faster than we ever thought. We managed to develop the EU solution to connect all European contact tracing apps, the so-called European Federated Gateway Server. And recently we developed the digital COVID certificates. And we did so within weeks and not years. The success of these solutions is rooted in the ability to work agile and together in the eHealth network. However, this crisis is not a normal situation. And we have shown that as member states, we can work together in close collaboration with the Commission. And in working that way, we are able to quickly develop interoperability guidelines due to a shared sense of urgency. But now, what about the next steps? The interoperability puzzle in Europe is a lot larger than just COVID and still not complete. Patients as well as healthcare professionals are still facing the consequences of not being able to get the right electronic information in the right place at the right time. Data, for example, is often locked into closed ecosystems. Many stakeholders are calling upon us that we need to overcome this deadlock. We all. They demand that governments intervene and to also look beyond their own national borders. Because interoperability is not a national issue. In fact, it is not a European issue. It's a worldwide issue, and it can only be solved together. The good news is that the momentum is there for achieving meaningful interoperability in a swiftly manner. Accelerated by the pandemic, the cooperation on digital health in Europe is intensifying, and the eHealth network will play its part. But currently, there are limitations in what we in the network can do. We are a voluntary collaboration of national authorities on digital health, since healthcare is a national competence. The network in its current form aims to align and coordinate common efforts. Our mandate derives from Article 14 of the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive from 2011. That is 10 years ago. Times have changed since 2011, and we have an obligation to rethink and perhaps reshape our role in stimulating and promoting interoperability within Europe. The eHealth network has, since its inception in 2012, done meaningful work in creating cross-border interoperability of health data. Together, we have created My Health at EU. And for those of you who are not familiar, that is a network of national contact points through which patient data can flow from one member state to the other in a safe and trusted way. We have been working on that for years and are still not done. With a sense of urgency, we can work faster. We have to work faster. We do not have another decade to try solving the interoperability puzzle. So I plead to solve the puzzles with the same sense of urgency as we did during the COVID pandemic. And in order to do so, I call upon the support of each of every member state and every stakeholder to help us. We need a shared perspective on how to solve the puzzle together. And we need to share the same vision when it comes to the way information is registered and exchanged in our national healthcare sectors. Even for the most simple things, like the way we register blood pressure or glucose, we should strive towards a common way of registering and exchanging data. In that context, I'm a strong supporter of the use of international standards like FHIR and SNOMED, which are mentioned in the report also. I truly believe that we should not reinvent the wheel for things already out there. I fully understand that the road to interoperability is a bumpy one, with more than enough challenges. But let us not lose sight of why we are working towards an interoperable Europe, namely the patient. If we can work out the interoperability challenges, then we can create huge opportunities for patients, healthcare professionals, but also, for example, for secondary use of data. For that, international cooperation is necessary. We can build upon 3 lessons learned from the pandemic. One is digital health is not a goal in itself. It must be undeniably clear that it is relevant to citizens, patients, care professionals. And the same goes for interoperability, that is unity of language and unity of tech. Secondly, international collaboration is hard work, but it's essential. And thirdly, we should address the most difficult questions with priority at first. Governments need to step up and use their authority to break through the market failure that's there and enforce standards in digital health data exchange, step for step, use case for use case, as part of an integrated ecosystem approach. This also means we need you guys too. We are all working towards the same goal. We, the Netherlands, we will take steps. In our own country, we will put into law the obligation to adhere to standards for use cases, together with the obligation to certify used systems. In the eHealth network, we, as a co-chair, will try to inspire all members to take actions. And to conclude, we will also do that on a worldwide scale, for example, as member of the Global Digital Health Partnership. And in that global community, we also asked HIMSS, HL7 and IHE to help us accelerate. And that is the bridge to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Ron. I think you've just stolen my thunder here, because that was exactly the transition that I was hoping to make. Ron, we're going to come back to you, and I hope all of you can stay here for the Q&A. And indeed, interoperability is not just a European issue, but an international issue. We've invited, and we are very glad that he accepted to speak with us today, Amit Trivedi from HIMSS. And we invited him exactly because he also represents the global consortium for eHealth interoperability, of which HIMSS, HL7 and IHE were founding members. Amit, joining us today from somewhere in the United States. Thanks very much. Floor is yours.
Hello and welcome, and thank you everyone for having me today on this panel. And I'm joining you today from San Diego, near San Diego, California. And so I wanted to say, you know, we didn't have a lengthy opportunity to get together and rehearse for this presentation, but I'm happy to say the messaging seems to be on point. You know, if you've taken a look at the white paper, you know, it speaks to the landscape in the European Union, but it also talks about coordination at the international level and some of the efforts that are going on in the US and internationally. And it's easy to see that there is coordination happening, as well as a greater need for it. So once again, thank you to Michael and your team for inviting me to this digital white paper launch. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Well, so this was a great white paper. It really outlined the landscape of interoperability and standards at a high level. I appreciated the references to some of the industry efforts by those such as HIMSS and the Global Consortium for eHealth Interoperability. I noticed that the white paper referenced some of the industry definitions for interoperability. And I think one of the things there is, let's note that the definition for interoperability also hones in on the use of that information. So in many of the talks that I give when we discuss interoperability over the years, it's important to know that things are evolving, things are changing, and so our expectations around interoperability also change over time. And so this white paper also provided a great overview of the standards landscape, not only the types of standards that we use in healthcare, but some of the organizations that help develop them. We talked about HL7 and IHE and others. But additionally, when we talk about interoperability and true interoperability, the kind that we need in healthcare, we really achieve that when technology and policy are in alignment. And so, of course, it's like the previous speakers have mentioned. It's more than the technical specifications that we're really talking about. We're looking at where we can find greater alignment around the policy that supports the adoption of these technical specifications. And so I did enjoy in the white paper not only the references to the standards organizations, but other efforts such as the paper around procuring interoperability, because you know, as we've seen not only in the U.S. but across the globe, procuring systems that are interoperable are also you know, a complex effort. And I think you know, Paul referenced this in his introduction when he spoke about referencing you know, the requirements and understanding capabilities and making sure that one side is talking to the other to make sure that that the interoperability that we need is procured and adopted, and the technology is developed with that in accordance. But switching over to the U.S., you may be familiar with some of the activities that have been going on there, but for well over 20 years, the government has been supporting the improved adoption of health IT and accelerated support of standards being incorporated into EHR technology through various programs and regulations. There's the program like the Meaningful Use program, which encouraged the adoption of certified health IT. And in this program, certified health IT was tested to ensure that it adhered to certain national requirements around standards, functionality, and security. So that's one of the things that may be a differentiator as we look at policy and how it's implemented across different governments, whether standards and different requirements are actually mandated in the regulations or whether they are recommended. And those things can make a difference in terms of adoption. And so today in the US, we're about to have a number of different regulations come into play. As I mentioned, over 20 years of different regulatory policies that have set this foundation of standards, trusted exchanges, common data elements, and policies to prevent information blocking and improve patient access to data using standards like FHIR. So this is what is about to happen in the US. But that said, we know that health IT is still a global challenge, and that's why we're here today, and that's why I was invited to this discussion. There's plenty of lessons to be learned from the broader community, especially now, given the COVID-19 emergency. Everywhere you look, you know, resources are stretched thin. Everyone everywhere is being asked to do more, faster, with less. And so at times like these, I think people rise to the challenge, and I feel it's an opportunity for greater mutual collaboration and innovation. And so looking ahead, the interoperability we need, I believe that some of the regulations that we put in place in the US have helped set the foundation for digital transformation here. But that said, we're looking at the gaps. We're looking at there's so much more work to be done, and we're looking at the international and broader standards and healthcare community for lessons learned. There's many new areas to be looking into and innovating in. There's the data around social determinants of health. In the US, there's a lot of work to do to improve and modernize our public health infrastructure. Our health IT activities are evolving, and we're looking at things like health equity and the disparities in healthcare delivery. And finally, it's all about outcomes at the end of the day. And so if there's one thing I can conclude this brief summary with, is that now is our time in the health IT community to really make an impact. You know, with the COVID-19 emergency, as I mentioned, resources are stretched thin. There's a more need than ever to collaborate and come together, not only in our local communities, but internationally to support the broader community to advance interoperability. And so looking forward to this further discussion to see what we can do as a community to advance interoperability. So thank you again.
And thank you, Amit, for casting a wider scope on the topic of interoperability, highlighting some of the more global challenges as well, and the wider data ecosystem. You mentioned also social determinants of health, for instance. So it also goes beyond just purely the clinical environment. I'm happy to pass on the floor now to Sabine Deurhofer. She's the Vice Chair of MedTech Europe Interoperability Working Group, and she's also working at Roche. Sabine, over to you.
Many thanks, Danny. Hi, everyone. I would like to briefly share a few thoughts about the value of our interoperability white paper, and why I believe you should read it. And if you have read it, I mean, why you should recommend it to your best friend. So the purpose of our white paper is to provide a comprehensive overview, create awareness about the importance of interoperability standards in a hands-on, very practically oriented way. Very easy to understand and easy to digest in one document. Really, one document you get back to more than once, right? So you have something where you can look at. So what about the next steps? The interpretation and standardization within one vendor or manufacturer is one thing, and sometimes quite challenging to implement and to maintain interoperability standards across the product portfolio. So up to the leverage to the full potential of interoperability, we need to take further steps towards the direction of the fourth level of interoperability, for example, defined by HIMSS, by the HIMSS definition in our paper. So interoperability standard has to happen in a bigger and more broader scale. And my vision and ambition is to co-create interoperability standards with manufacturers, vendors, regulatory policies, customers, and patients, for example, within the Europe, across borders, for example, also together with MTE and COCIR across the industry associations. And yeah, I will hand over back to Danny or to Michael to hand over to Andreas. This was just a few thoughts from my side. Thanks, everyone.
Very good. Thank you, Sabine, for coming in. And I think these will be food for thought for our discussion later. And I see in the chat we're also going to talk a little bit more about the role of the industry here. With that, I'd like to indeed transition to Andreas Klingler, who is the COCIR chair, the chair of the COCIR EHR and Interoperability Group. Andreas, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. The nice thing about standards is that they make things work between products of different vendors, especially when it's about interoperability standards. The bad thing, however, is there are so many of them, so it's really difficult to understand if you are like from a company, a developer, or even if you're a policymaker, which of the standards to choose. And there have been a couple of initiatives already, like in Germany, where I'm from, there's the VESTA. In the United States, there's the Interoperability Standards Advisory, or recently the ISO Reference Standards Portfolio for Clinical Imaging was released, and currently also the Global Digital Health Partnership is aiming to create a global standards master guide, global master standards guide. So there's really a great need to have comprehensive information, which of the standards are really applicable in specific scenarios and are also implementable, either for vendors, but also for policymakers. So in this sense, MedTech Europe and COCIR came together to aggregate the knowledge of the industry members and give an overview of the relevant international standards for digital health and make this more easily accessible. Sabine just explained this nicely. International is mentioned also. I especially liked Ron's comment on that. Is a really important aspect on that, especially also from the industry perspective, because most of the players in the medtech industry are really active internationally. And adapting a product to national or even regional standards is very costly, and might even be costly to even offer the product at all. So it's really important that especially policymakers also refrain from creating and mandating potentially even local standards. Instead, they should create, engage and incentivize the creation of international standards and only profile really if necessary for local needs. The best practice for this, Sabine also alluded a little bit to this, is an open consensus approach where the wisdom of the many is essentially used to make workable and useful standards. However, still a challenge in this area is to ensure that a sufficient number of experts are really engaged in this consensus process. So that's really some food for thought to think about mechanisms to make more engagement and possible and incentivize this. Another important aspect is that these standards are really proven. That means they really address the problem which they claim to address, and they can actually be implemented by vendors. So in parallel to the development of the standards, it's really best practice. Essentially, it would be to have some reference implementations. A good example of this is the European vaccination proof, where there also an open source reference implementation is available to really show that it's can be made working. Or additionally, hackathons should be set up where the specifications which are currently in work are really tried out to implement it and see if this actually works. So essentially, finally, then there's the need to expand on the existing standards guides, like the one which we have just released, to give more orientation also going forward. It was also mentioned that the landscape changes constantly. Standards which are still out there are most likely not too applicable right now or in 5 years from now. So it needs to be known to policymakers, but also to vendors who implement the standards, which are the ones which are most relevant for the current task at hand. With that, I think I hand back then to Michael.
I think that's me indeed. Thank you very much. And I think those are all, I think, very valid observations, which all tie in a little bit to the question that was also asked in the chat regarding all of the industry. Now, I would like to, before we open this up for questions, and I again would like to encourage you to raise your hand and become part of the conversation. Maybe give first Paul an opportunity to talk to one another, to raise the question, maybe to one of you, to all of you. Paul, are you still here with us?
I am. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, I listening to all the great introductions. there was a question that came up in my mind. One of the aspects that the paper speaks to is the different layers from the viewpoint of the scale at which you are considering interoperability. At a very high level, as I said in my introduction, you see, let's say, the need for interoperability between hospitals in completely different organizations, maybe cross-border, an important theme for patients that happen to be not at home when they become a patient. Let's say more the point of care, which is not only much more local, but also usually much more fine-grained, both in density of the information and in the real-time character, because it's really the bedside kind of thing. Now, it occurs to me that both Europe and the United States have taken the recommendation by heart, or maybe invented that recommendation themselves, even better, that public authorities can actually foster the convergence of demand for deployments of interoperability standards. Amit spoke to that, how the US is doing that. And somehow I get the feeling that in Europe we are focusing more on the high level than on the more in-depth level of the scale, so to speak. That may have something to do with the complexity in Europe that, as Ron said, the competence for healthcare IT is formally part of the competence of for healthcare, which is with the member states, not with the Commission. So it's actually harder in Europe to coordinate those efforts. And that in turn is consistent with the fact that we see some member states, quite prominently Germany at the moment, accelerate in setting requirements. So I would like to invite Sari and Ron actually to speak a bit to how we actually can go about getting a more complete palette, not only, let's say, the European EHR requirements, but a more complete palette of interoperability standards, and keep it consistent between the different member states so that we don't get different member states taking the lead in different directions. Is that possible? How could we do that? What can industry do to help? That is a question that intrigues me. Thank you.
That's a great question. And I think Carrie, Ron, who would like to go first? Carrie?
Maybe I would just start. I'm sure Ron will be able to complement a great deal from a national perspective. I mean, I think in developing, for example, the Commission recommendation on the European exchange format, we thought of both scenarios. We thought of cross-border, and we also thought of the needs within a member state. And certainly the ambition was that we would get so far in our definition of a standard that it would be something that is applicable in both contexts. Not to say that you don't have to then take it and tailor it to some degree where you're working, but we really wanted it to be, we aimed it, of course, at the cross-border. This is where Europe is active and has competence, but we wanted it to be helpful within the national context as well. That was certainly the ambition. So as people, hospitals, for example, who are doing both, who are sharing data internally and across border, don't have to live with two sets of specifications in their head. Clearly, that's not very helpful. So that was certainly the ambition. In terms of the role of the industry in this, I think this is fundamental, that the industry, we need to help us understand what standards are out there, help us understand how commonly standards are being used, help, if possible, come together as a community and tell us which you prefer, because this is obviously all extremely important and helpful for the decision making. And tell us what you see into the future, because you have a much better picture on that than we do in government. So I think the role of industry is incredibly important. And as to the question about how we can accelerate it, I mean, as both Ron and I have mentioned, and the issue with the pandemic and how what we were able to produce together in very little time, and the call he made really, can we move faster on this? Well, I think it's, at the end of the day, it's about resources. So it's not to say that we cannot, rather than run processes end to end, try and run them in parallel, try and create more initiatives that are working in real time to create the draft, developing the specifications, and then do the work of finding what's the consensus picture. So it's all feasible. I think it's a question of resources and political will at all levels, and engagement from your side as well. I hope that helps.
Thank you. With that, to Ron.
Yes, and to put it boldly, it's a bit strange that worldwide operating companies ask government to take action. Why not a worldwide standard that is outside of competition, and all of those active in MedTech adhere and use? So what's happened is there's sort of a market failure. Too many standards and systems don't speak to each other. So first of all, it's up to tech also to make up your mind and start working together on worldwide standards. For example, I would love to see a ISO standard on the exchange of medical images and reports between hospitals. For example, that all of you say we are going to work to implement that standard in all of our systems, so that if hospital A wants to share an image to hospital B, it'll go from the one hospital to the other one, and it'll be available at the receiving end. And it's a bit strange that in tech, so much used to standardize, to get to norms together with ISO, for example. Now everyone looks at us. That's one. And secondly, of course, if everyone looks at us, we will step in. But please know that I'm just a civil servant. I'm not an expert in MedTech. You are. You guys are. So what I'll do then is look to you, go to ISO and say, and then say, please get all those parties together and get them to get to one standard they all will adhere to. So we are in this strange situation where we have a market failure with too many standards, and market itself is not capable of getting to decide on just one of them. And I love to see that our national fire standards, for example, are as close to the US core implementation as possible, for example. But that's what we do. I would love to see MedTech also to strive for that.
That's excellent. Playing the ball back to the industry, I think. What do industry representatives have to say to that? Paul, please, one more.
Yeah, if I may for a second. And Ron, I appreciate what you say. I think the term market failure is as such justified. But I think there is definitely also a component of the demand side to let's say the Mexican standoff, if you will, or the roadblock that we're facing. And that has to do with actually not only a lack of coordination, which is happening both at the demand side and the supply side in the marketplace, where of course competition factors also play a role, all agreed. But I think there's also a great variety in national or even more local preferences. When we look at the semantics layer, it has to do even with where clinicians have been educated, what they are used to, what is historically grown the habit in the organization they work for, but also all sort of things like language requirements, certain preferences as to the options for standards. I think many of us will know that, for instance, DICOM is one of the most widely deployed standards that is least being discussed whether or not it has to be deployed. It's de facto the standard that ensures interoperability between everything related to imaging. Nonetheless, we as industry are facing a tremendous amount of local flavors and requirements. And yeah, I hope you would appreciate that even for large players in the industry, it is almost impossible to know them all, leave alone to harmonize them to the effect that you can create deployments at a scale that is affordable, not only for the industry, but also for its customers. So without going further into, let's say, a debate on just this point, also with a view of time, I would say there is also a demand side issue, and public authorities could help to resolve that. Thank you.
I see vigorous nodding in many of our video feeds here. Would Amit like to amplify a little bit on this, or anybody else?
Sure, happy to chime in. And so, you know, I was going to say it speaks to the immense complexity that we have in front of us as well. Everything's also constantly evolving. So with, you know, we have to advance, yet at the same time make sense of all the changes. And for example, you know, in the health IT world, we're seeing two worlds, you know, clashing, with classical interoperability on one side, with, you know, CDA-based documents being exchanged, and now we have new standards like FHIR, and it's actually not even that new. It's just in health IT time space, it's relatively new, but that just means more work ahead. But that said, it comes down to, you know, the alignment between technology, policy, market forces, all of that. And I think we're at one of those times where there's an inflection point. Every now and then, I think our efforts kind of rise to a higher level of visibility. In the US, when they implemented meaningful use, all of a sudden EHRs became part of the vernacular. You could talk about electronic health records and people had this expectation. I think we're at this point now where patients are also now expecting to have access to this interoperability that really we've been trying to chase just in the healthcare world. So with that, and in the context of the COVID challenge, I think we have an immense opportunity to collaborate at the international level to build these international standards and then profile locally, as Andreas had mentioned. But you know, the challenge is in front of us, but so is the opportunity, and that's why conversations like these excite me, as well as pulling together panels like these experts and seeing that folks are in alignment.
I don't know how else we could top this, Amit. I think complexity, but also need for alignment. And I think somebody earlier said we don't have another 10 years to solve this puzzle. I think with that, I don't think it can get any better than this. And with kind of some remarkable silence from our audience, I would suggest let's close it here. Thank you so much for all of you to join this discussion. I think this has been really candid and frank, and we would like to thank our audience here for coming, for attending this webinar. We will post the recording of this webinar on our respective websites, and you will be notified when that is the case. And we look forward to welcome to continuing the discussion with many of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, and please a round of applause, and then we'll let you get back to whatever you're doing. And with that, thank you so much for this, and thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.